Okay, that's weird. It just is working now. We are live on YouTube.
Oh no.
Hello out there. Great. Oh, there's you. Oh, it's a big old Zoom watermark. Dang
Oh
it.
no.
That's fine.
Can we turn that off?
I don't know how. Oh, there's subtitles? That's cool.
Oh, interesting. Somebody raised their hand.
Yes, hello, Karen. All right. Getting things set up. Remove your spotlight for now so we can possibly share and chat and get this event going on YouTube or on Discord. Okay, here we are. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 2024 Refold webinar, web goals setting, everything. It's very nice to have you here. Before we totally get started, I want to make sure that everybody has a chance to download the homework because we're going to be using that during the session. We're going to be going through this assignment together and giving you something that you've accomplished at the end. And so you can go to this link that I've put in the chat here. I'm also going to put one into the YouTube chat for anybody that is watching there. Let me just go over there. Where is the chat? Oh, it's a private video? Hang on. This whole live streaming to YouTube thing is strange.
We apologize for the technical difficulties. It's our
Please
first
stand
time
by.
doing Zoom to YouTube.
Oh, it does say it's public. I'm confused.
Okay.
Oh, I was just looking at the wrong version. Don't don't be a fool. Yeah. Yeah, Vincent says it's not private. I
Great.
figured that out. Okay, so there's the homework links. If anybody needs the homework to download, go ahead and do that now. And we will be working on that together. It's also something you can do post stream. So if you don't want to worry about printing things out right now or finding a way to edit a PDF, don't worry about it. You can be here, be present. You can take notes is also a good idea. But yeah, as we give people a little bit more time to trickle in here, why don't we have a little chat, Ethan? Hello, how are you?
Hi, Ben. I'm good. How's your year kicking off?
Quite well, actually. A little bit of stress as I'm looking for a new apartment, but everything
Yeah.
else is going well. This has been fun to set up, if not a little stressful. And my language learning is going really well. So I really can't complain. Two big old thumbs up from
Yeah,
me
how is your
about
check? I haven't heard
2024.
an update from you in a while.
I'm almost at 500 hours, actually. I
Wow.
just passed 300 days. And I've actually just this week started doing a bunch of crosstalk, which has been
Oh,
awesome.
awesome.
I saw this video from somebody about their crosstalk process, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. I want to try that.
Hmm.
And so I jumped into it and I immediately found some people to chat with. And it's been really cool. I've already had like 3 sessions. Next week I have 4 scheduled. It's been really fun to like communicate and chat with real Czech people
Yeah.
because it's like the language in my mind has almost been like this fictional language that I only come across in media and on YouTube and stuff. But then like a real person that I'm talking to is a lot. I don't know. It's really cool.
Yeah. For those that don't know in the audience, crosstalk is when each person
Oh
speaks in
yeah.
their native language. So Ben is speaking in English, and his speaking partner is speaking in Czech
Check.
in this case. And
Yeah,
did you have
and
to explain that to the person? Because I feel like every time I've tried to do crosstalk, people get very confused because they've never heard of it before.
um people actually the Czech people seem to pick up on it really quickly.
Okay.
Like they go, I've even had people reach out to me on my Hello Talk profile, go, I saw you mentioned crosstalk. That sounds cool. Can we try it? And like they just immediately write me to me in Czech and I respond in English and they just seem to get it, even though it's like it is new to them.
Hmm.
A couple of them do kind of have to be reminded, like, no, you speak in Czech and I speak in English.
Yeah.
And then they go, okay, that sounds good in English. I'm like, no, 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 you would write to, in Czech. So sometimes it'll take a little bit longer, but they all catch on pretty quickly.
You need to learn how to explain it in Czech.
I did translate it with DeepL, but
Yeah.
I've done literally zero trying to like form thoughts in Czech.
Hmm.
And I use DeepL, but it translated things with the formal U.
Oh, yeah.
And so a couple of people were, it's like, and it seems to be a bit bigger of a deal in Czech. So people are like, yeah,
Okay.
it's kind of weird to like address it because we like the same age. Like sending me a thing is that it's like, do you mind if I use the informal? And I go, well, yeah, of course. That was not on purpose. But
Yeah, I
yeah,
always got
it's
to be
been
careful of those registers.
exactly. It's
Yeah.
not something that you always like think about coming from English, but
Hmm. Yeah, it's funny. Listening to occasionally I'll watch like an HBO thing that has some sort of formal register that's been translated.
mhm,
And, usually they translate it into the informal in English because we use informal, but sometimes they'll leave the subtitles in the formal um like mode. And
mhm.
so the same way that you would be like your highness, but they would all the pronoun to be like her, but in
Oh,
English.
interesting.
Yeah. I was watching I think it was like a period piece on I think Norwegian royal family leaving during World War II and coming to the States.
Hmm.
And so they when they translated the subtitles, they left it in a formal register in English.
There you go.
Yeah, it was funny. I've never seen that before.
Well, speaking of never seeing something before, do you want
Yeah.
to hop into our real presentation?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, I'm going to shut up and
I'm
let you do your thing.
going to share my screen. All right. You can see that? All
Yes,
right,
I can
great.
see that. So I hope
Cool.
that
All right.
everybody can. And we also um the chat should be good. I think it was on the wrong mode, but I'm seeing YouTube chat come in and attendees can chat with everyone. So I think we're okay on the chat front.
Awesome.
But yeah, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Happy New Year. Welcome to our New Year's resolutions webinar. Um, I hope that you had a great holiday season, that you celebrated, that you got some relaxation time. My guess is that if you're here, you're looking towards the 2024 and setting your goals for the year, setting your resolutions. I know, Ben and I are also doing the same. And so we thought we'd set up this webinar as a way to help y'all with setting up these resolutions in a way that won't fail. As you'll see later in the presentation, New Year's resolutions often don't work out very well. And so I want to provide basically everything that I've learned over the past decade to help you with things. So about a decade ago, I did not have a huge amount going for me with New Year's resolutions, basically failed at them repeatedly. Nowadays, I'm like pretty confident in my personal growth. When I set my mind to something, I can accomplish it. As you all know, I'm building Refold, and then I also have my personal goals on the side that I'm working through. But 10 years ago, I had lots of dreams. I would set tons of goals. Um, and I would start the year strong, but then I wouldn't follow through on those goals. Basically, every single year, I would start them and then just give it up. And so, my hope is that through this presentation, I can sort of share with you what I've learned over the past 10 years and help you accomplish your goals. So, if you're on this call, it's probably because you want to learn a language in 2024. Even if you want to do another goal, this will still be useful for you. You've probably tried these goals before. You've probably tried resolutions or learning a language, but not really had success with it. Maybe you struggled with motivation, discipline, focus. And it's very normal to struggle with language learning in particular because it's such a big project. It's honestly one of the biggest personal challenges that you can take on in your life. And people don't really give it the level of respect that it deserves, given how difficult of a task it is. And when I think of language learning, I sort of break it up into three different levels. It's sort of three projects simultaneously. The first is the most obvious one, and that's when you're learning the actual language, so vocabulary, grammar, everything that you do on a day-to-day basis. But then there's the second level, which is the methodology, the tools, the techniques, the strategies, and that's something that we at Refold have worked really hard to standardize so that you all can benefit. That's what's in our guide and also in our course. But then there's this sort of third level that is not super well addressed. And it's something that I feel like 90% of people struggle with. It's something that I personally struggled with for a really long time. And that's how do you actually accomplish any personal project, not just language learning, but any significant project that takes multiple months or multiple years. It's really difficult for us to do that in our lives. We may excel really well in school or in work when we have this external structure, but it's really hard for us to do it on our own in our personal lives. And back in 2012, when I first tried learning a language, when I first tried learning Spanish, I really just focused in on that first level, just learning the actual language. I just downloaded some apps and some tools, and I just like went at it. But I really kind of ignored the methodology side and also, how do I accomplish anything? I just didn't have the experience necessary to know that I needed to think about these other levels. And unsurprisingly, I was not successful in that attempt. I gave up after about 6 weeks of trying to learn Spanish. Um, and I'm not alone in that. In the United States alone, around 100 million Americans make New Year's resolutions every year, and it's estimated that between 80 and 90% of them don't reach their goal by the end of the year. There's actually one study that demonstrates that 45% of them give up on the first month. And I usually lasted about a month or 6 weeks, so I definitely fit into that 45% for a long time. And so why does this happen? For me, it was looking back at what I was doing, it's actually quite obvious. Every year I would set this goal and I would create plans for a different version of myself. I would imagine that I was had more motivation, had more willpower, that I was more dedicated than I actually was. And so I'd set very, very difficult goals and I would assume that I could just push my way through things. So this is sort of like making plans for this ideal version of myself instead of who I actually was, which at the time was someone who really struggled to follow through on all of my personal projects. That was my true identity. And I really couldn't come to terms with that, probably because of ego. And it took me a long time to really break down and look at who I actually was with all of my faults. At the time, I really looked up to sort of the titans of productivity. You've probably heard of all of these people: Musk, Cuban, Goggins, and Sandberg. These people are sort of like the superhumans in our society. They work ridiculous hours. They give motivational videos about just needing to be more disciplined, more motivated. And I really looked up to this style of work. And I thought that I could just force myself to be like them tomorrow if I just tried hard enough. But the reality is, they operate kind of in a superhuman capacity. Like they're working 100 hours a week. Mark Cuban says he didn't take a vacation for the first 7 years of his career. And the list goes on. It's really an intense way to live. And even though I thought I could do that same thing, I would dive into the projects and I would grind, but I just could not work at that level from one day to the next. And unfortunately, it created this cycle of failure. So I would grind for a couple weeks. I would eventually lose motivation. I would burn out. I would give up. And then I would just switch to the next thing and do the exact same process over again. And so I basically just had hundreds of projects that I had started and then stopped. And they were all sitting around me, and I felt guilty about not pursuing them, but I couldn't really muster my way through that burnout. And around age 24, 25, about a decade ago, I decided that, okay, I'd had enough. I've tried this hundreds of times. It has not worked. So I need to figure out something new. And so I sort of took a step back and decided to really tackle this in a more coherent fashion, more diligent about experimenting with myself and trying to figure out what would actually work for me. So in this presentation, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Refold and about my story of starting Refold, and then dive into sort of 10 lessons that I've learned over the past 10 years, and then focusing in on willpower. How can we actually improve our willpower in order to assist us with with pursuing these projects? And my hope is that by the end of this, you have the tools that you need to start that process for yourself, that you can start to experiment with the lessons in this, experiment with what makes you more productive, more successful, and start that process that will actually lead you to success in the future. Our goal here at Refold is really about your success. We want you to achieve your goals of language learning and other goals in your life as well. And that's why we focus so heavily on the sustainability of language learning. We know it takes multiple years to reach fluency, and so we need to make sure that whatever you're doing is something that you can do for multiple years, that you're not going to burn out quickly. I'm trying to help you avoid the repeated mistakes that I made over and over again. All right, so who am I today? About 3 years ago, I founded Refold with Matt First Japan. Our first project was to build the roadmap. Matt had actually been working on it on his own for a little over a year, and he was really struggling to really wrap his head around it and like really make progress with the project. And we connected through the Discord. And in just 3 months of me taking charge of the project and him handing me over the controls, we managed to write basically the entire roadmap in those 3 months, 45 guides, more than 50,000 words, even though neither of us had actually ever done anything even remotely similar to that. And through that experience, he grew to trust me. He was very impressed with my ability to actually get things done. And so he put me in charge of the company, and I've been running it ever since. But 10 years ago, I definitely could not have accomplished that. 10 years ago, I used to oversleep. I had all sorts of problems, but oversleeping was a big one. I remember back in college, I used to sleep until the late afternoon. My physics lab partner would call me at like 1 p.m. telling me to wake up and to come to class because I was missing it. And nowadays, completely different. I'm waking up at 5 a.m. Today, I woke up at like 4:45, no alarm. And that's just sort of how I live my life now. And that's been a huge improvement. I used to procrastinate really, really badly. I would wait until the very last minute to start anything, and I would just work through the night, sometimes pulling 24 hours, up to 36 hours even. Nowadays, not an issue. I am very focused. Every day I get around 4 hours of very dedicated focus time, focused on the most important project that I'm working on. And really for the first, 2 years of Refold, I was working by myself. So I was not procrastinating. I was able to actually accomplish the things that I set my mind to. 10 years ago, I was very addicted to social media, especially Facebook and Reddit. I actually measured it at one point, and I was doing like 4 to 6 hours a day, quite a lot. Nowadays, I barely use social media, mostly texting and then occasionally YouTube. But so that's a huge improvement on my life. And then another, as I mentioned, 10 years ago, failed at my goals repeatedly. Nowadays, I am setting multiple goals per year and achieving a lot of them. So obviously building the company, learning languages, and then physical fitness is also pretty important to me. So the question is like, how did I make that change? How did I go from someone who could not accomplish anything to somebody who could accomplish pretty much anything I set my mind to? And I'm really inspired by James Clear. He's a big influence of mine, but he really focuses on tiny changes, tiny, small things that seem unimportant. But when you do thousands of them over the course of many years, they eventually build up into something really significant, really big, huge changes in your life. And so the goal of this talk is to sort of provide that framework of how do you actually create those experiments? How do you set up the structure so that you can start to improve your own process, your own projects, and start this lifelong project of building these tiny improvements up to a very significant change. So quick warning, there's a lot of content and advice in this presentation. There's honestly more than you can really absorb in just one watch. We're going to do a bunch of little practice assignments throughout the presentation so that you can practice with some of these things. But I would highly recommend coming back and rewatching every month or 2 months to pick up on new learnings, because some of the things are not going to be relevant for you right now, and some of them may not be relevant for 6 months. So you'll have the recording after this. You can always come back to it and improve, but you really want to just focus in on identifying the next challenge for yourself, the next improvement, and focusing on that for a week or 2 weeks or a month. And then once you have it solid, then move on to the next one. So really take this tiny, really take it one step at a time. So without further ado, we can jump right in. Also, sorry, before I jump in, there will be a Q&A at the end, but I'll also be asking people to throw things into the chat. So Ben, if anything comes up in the chat that you think is important, feel free to interrupt me.
Yep, I'm on it.
Awesome. Cool. Lesson one. So I mentioned this already. I used to make plans for a future or an ideal version of myself, not who I actually was in that moment today. I'd assume that I would have, infinite motivation, infinite willpower. I assumed that I would be a better version. I assumed that I could be like those superhumans. And I think that was really rooted in ego. I had a better version in my head of who I was. And I really had to come to terms with, no, actually, I have lots of faults. I have lots of things that I need to improve. And so by acknowledging who you are today, it will help you create better plans that are more appropriate, rather than some future version of yourself. So first homework assignment, I guess not homework, I guess, first assignment. Who are you? I think this is a very important self-reflection that people should do pretty often. Why are you here in this webinar? What is it about your previous attempts at language learning or other projects do you feel like have not worked out? Do you feel guilt and disappointment about those things that haven't worked out? Are there specific challenges that you have been working on or trying to get through? And then, really ask yourself, when you set goals for yourself, are you creating an ideal version? Are you thinking, oh, I'm going to do, 10 hours a day for the whole year, when in reality, you don't have time for 10 hours, you don't have energy for 10 hours, and you've never done something like that. So we really want to come to terms with who we are. So I'm going to boot up the chat and just sort of see what people are put it in here. Da, 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 da. Looks like people are still commenting on the social media. Let's see.
I also think that people might be looking for the homework or doing it in their actual sheet, because
Okay.
sharing might also be a little bit spooky.
Sure.
So,
Aaron is relating to setting goals for the idealized version. Yeah, it's something that I think most people do. I saw a meme a while ago that was like, every goal I set assumes that I'll wake up tomorrow a completely different version of myself. Tends to be all or nothing person, focus on one hobby and leave everything else out and then switch, trying to find balance. Sure. Yeah, that's definitely a challenge. I've done that many, many times. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. It is just something you need to be aware of when you're setting your plans. Struggle with ADHD. Yep. Yeah, a lot of folks struggle with ADHD, especially in this day and age when there's so many distractions, so many easy ways to get distracted, so many easy ways to satisfy boredom. So really coming to terms with the reality of who you are is what I'm trying to get across here. So come back to this at some point in the future, or spend a little bit more time other than these few minutes to really dig into who you are. It's also not something that you'll know immediately. You won't really know who you are until you push yourself or attempt to run an experiment and then it doesn't work because your assumptions about yourself are wrong. So you learn about yourself through the process of experimentation. So let's move on to lesson 2. So this is similar. Know thyself. It's not enough just to think of what you are. We really need to measure. Humans are really, really bad at understanding our own behavior. We're not objective observers. I'm sure you've seen that eyewitnesses often report different things from the same event. Our memories, they change and distort over time. This has been measured repeatedly. We really just can't trust our memories of ourselves or other people. So if knowing yourself is really the most important step towards starting the improvement, measuring is how you make progress towards knowing yourself and then make progress towards improving. So on my end, the way that I experimented that was in 2016, I was looking for increased productivity. I found a talk by this real estate guy. I can't remember his name at the moment. And he was talking about how he wore a stopwatch around his neck to actually count the amount of time that he was actually working during the day. And he realized it was way less than he thought it was. So I repeated that, or that I did that process for myself. I wore a stopwatch for about 6 months. I wrote down literally everything that I did. And the real productivity that I was investing each day was actually less than 4 hours per day. I was really shocked at how little I was doing in a workday. And when I looked at my social media consumption, it was in the 4 to 6 hours per day range. It was enormous, specifically Facebook and Reddit. I really struggled to break a Facebook addiction, and I was on Reddit constantly. But measurement leads to change. And once I knew that my productivity was so low and that I was wasting so much time on the internet, I was able to start making changes. And over the course of the next few months, I managed to build up my productivity to around 7 to 8 hours a day. And my superiors at my company took notice. I actually got promoted 3 times in the 9 months after I made that change. I went from an engineer up to a tech lead, and then an engineering manager, and then up to director of product and engineering in less than a year. And so you can make, once you do the measurement, once you see where you're spending your time, you can really modify and make sure that you're spending your time and energy on the things that matter to you rather than things that just waste your time. And that will have a outsized impact on your life. And most people don't do that. So you can very quickly surpass your peers in terms of productivity. So you probably haven't worn a stopwatch before. And I don't necessarily recommend doing that. It was a very, time consuming and high administrative burden. But what you can do is you can look at how you spend time on your phone. This is something that's automatically tracked on Android. iPhone, sometimes it's tracked and sometimes it's not, so it may or may not work for you. But this is my report for December 29th, I think. So on December 29th, I spent 2 hours and 20 minutes on my phone. 51 of those minutes were on Chrome. Some of that was on YouTube. I think like half an hour on YouTube. I unlocked my phone 55 times throughout the day, and I got 221 notifications. So for those of you who have a phone sitting next to you, I'd recommend that you become familiar with this tool. So pull out your phone, pull up your settings, the digital well-being on Android or the screen time on iPhone, and take a look at where you're spending your time. How much time are you spending on your phone in a day? Which apps are, taking over your time and really sucking a lot of that time out of your day? And go ahead and post in the chat, sort of give an average or an estimate of how much time you are spending on your phone each day. There we go. Manuel says 4 hours and 10 minutes average daily. Dennis is 4 hours, 2 hours and 20 minutes. Jordan, so much. Yeah, so if you use the computer, there are some digital well-being tools available, but I'm not 100% sure how they work. The one on Mac, the screen time has not really been tracking enough for me. So there are other tools like Rescue Time that can track it for you instead. But Chris, hour and 30 minutes, not bad. That's actually pretty low. 10 hours from language file life. Yes, that's definitely a lot. 5 hours, 48 minutes. So I'm curious, are you surprised by the amount of time that you spend on your phone? Um, are you Dennis says yes, Jordan says no. Lingophile life. Yeah, so on the one hand, we know that we spend a lot of time on our phones. They're very addictive devices. Um, but this can help us gain insight into how much time we're spending, because if it really is 4 hours a day, 5 hours a day, 7 hours a day, um, it is really, really detrimental to our lives. It's taking away so much from us. And one of the things that we're going to talk about a lot later is how do you actually break out of your phone? How do you break out of these tools that, while very useful and very entertaining, have also been designed to be extremely addictive to us? So, gonna move on to the next one. Oh, a couple people are commenting on Toggle. Yes, we highly recommend using Toggle for time tracking um, in your language learning, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later. So, lesson 3, improvement is continuous. So I used to expect very fast results on everything, and that was actually a motivating factor for me. And I really had to change my mentality when it came to this approach to improvement, because it's not something that happens overnight. It's something that requires this continuous daily investment. You can't expect big jumps. There's this constant questioning of how can I be a little bit better than yesterday? How do I improve a little bit? Or looking back at the past week, how do I improve and on what I did last week? And as you learn about yourself and about the project that you're working on, you'll be able to make better guesses and better changes that will have a bigger effect, but they'll still be relatively minor. But it is really important to get that experience before you start making huge plans. This is another big problem that I had. I would make plans for, 6 months or a whole year, but the reality is I didn't actually know myself or the project. And so those plans obviously did not work. You don't have enough information on day one to create a plan for day 100 or day 200. It's really this iterative, small improvements over time. So no action on this one. I'm going to go straight into lesson 4. Um, this one took me a very long time to learn. Excellence takes focus. So you can reach mediocrity pretty quickly in pretty much anything. But to become truly good at something, you really need to focus on it for a long period of time. In the research that I found, around 78% of people who make resolutions set 3+ resolutions every year. I used to do the same. I would have all sorts of goals every year that I wanted to accomplish. And it was honestly too much. Uh, the I would just divide my time and I would not actually make progress with it, because adults don't really have that kind of time to accomplish many goals simultaneously. The first year that I actually chose to just do one goal was also the first year I actually accomplished a goal. And that was in 2016 when I decided to learn guitar. I said, I'm going to dedicate the entire year of 2016 from January 1st to December 31st to guitar. I'm not going to try and do any other significant project during that time. And what was nice about that is it gave me permission to say no. Anytime a new idea came up or I got excited about something, I'd be like, no, I'm going to add it to my list. I'll tackle that in 2016 or 2017 or 2018. And that was really freeing. It allowed me to really just focus in on the one thing that I was able to make the most progress on in the year. And so I highly recommend, as you are going through your planning process, to really focus in on one big project at a time. It doesn't mean that you have to cut everything else out of your life, but everything else should basically be on maintenance mode. So if your goal is, if you have competing goals between language learning and fitness, maybe just put fitness on a maintenance level rather than being a really hard push to improve something. Put it on maintenance, just go to the gym your normal amount, a casual amount while you focus on language learning, and then later on switch it. Along those same lines, excellence takes time. So, like I said, I used to really like that really fast improvement that comes from the initial learning process. I used to be obsessed with the book, The First 20 Hours, which is basically you can become decent in any skill in just 20 hours of practice. And that's true. Decent is actually quite easy to achieve. But if you actually want to be good, like really good, it takes a much, much longer than that. The research that I found identified that around 45% of resolution makers give up after 1 month, about 55% after 3 months. And the reality of language learning is that it takes longer than 1 month or 3 months. And so if you want to really become good at language learning, good at the language that you're targeting, you need to dedicate a substantial amount of time to the project, as it really is your core focus. Now, that being said, you can actually make a lot of progress in 3 months. And what is nice about the 3 months is that you can prove to yourself that you are able to make progress. A lot of us have never really accomplished anything major in our personal lives. And so we have to change that mentality about ourselves. So the action item here is a combination of the two previous ones. We want to choose one target that we're going to focus on for the first 100 days of 2024. So there are two books here, The One Thing and The Power of Full Engagement, both great books, really emphasizing how much more progress you can make on something if it is your sole project and if you stick with that sole project for a period of time. Now, lots of folks have lots of different goals coming into the year. I'm sure lots of folks on the call right now have maybe 3 or even 5 goals for the year, but we really want to identify what is the most important thing to you going into 2024. So make a quick list and then figure out what is actually the most important. And it may not be language learning. Language learning may not be important to you for the first part of 2024. You may have a more important goal. So is language learning your goal, or do you have something else that you want to commit to in the first part of this year? Go ahead and drop that in the chat. And for context, language learning is actually not my goal for 2024. I will get back to it probably in 3-4 months. But right now, my goal is actually focusing on building my friendships and my relationships and my support system here in San Francisco. I have been so focused on the company for so long that I've kind of let all of my friendships decay, and I don't really have a close-knit group of friends. So that's my goal going into 2024. I want to strengthen those friendships. So we got goals to save money. Yes. Financial well-being is probably one of the most foundational aspects of life. If you are not in a good place financially, it's extremely stressful and it's really hard to focus on other things. There's tons of great YouTubers out there that make video about personal finance, but realistically, personal finance is a pretty simple process. Basically, spend less than you earn and invest in things that will provide you benefit instead of spending it on things that don't. So if you find that financial stress is getting in the way of you focusing on other things, highly recommend dealing with that. Johan or Joanne, yes. Knee injury, so rehab is primary goal. Exactly. So recovering from an injury is extremely taxing to your body. You require a lot of rest and a lot of work and a lot of willpower and a lot of psychological engagement. Is something that you really need to do on every day and think about every day. And it's often too difficult to commit to another psychologically difficult thing at the same time. So if that is your primary goal and you have a rehab schedule, maybe it's 2 months, 3 months, then yes, absolutely focus on that before jumping into the next thing. Make it sort of the centerpiece of your improvement. Going to the gym and language learning, sure. So this is a perfect example. So both of those are really important, right? Both of them are good self-improvement goals. Gym or physical fitness is very foundational in a lot of people's lives, and a lot of folks don't have that worked out for themselves. Fortunately, I'm at a place where I can do physical fitness as a maintenance thing rather than as a primary goal for myself. I get 3 to 5 workouts in a week. They're relatively small. I don't push myself too hard. It's really mostly just about maintaining my physique or maintaining my health. And so that allows me to focus on something else. But if you're the kind of person that really wants to get a solid gym routine in and a solid physical exercise routine going before you work on other things, that is totally fair. Jonathan is surviving work. That's unfortunate perspective, but good luck with surviving. And then reframing my language learning to just maintain. Totally makes sense. So you can drop down your language learning to just be, you know, one of the things we recommend to folks is to turn off new cards on Anki and just do refreshers to switch to mostly free flow, things that are easier and more comfortable for you. Landing a stable job. Yes, absolutely. Very important. Sleep. Yes, we're going to talk about sleep in a bit. Cool. So with that in mind, we really want to commit to 100 days dedicated to whatever your primary thing is. You know, you can do a little bit less, but 100 days is nice and round, and it's going to help with the math. So lesson 6, when we're setting goals, we often set these really ambitious results-based goals, like I want to be fluent, or I want to lose weight, or lose 15 pounds, gain 15 pounds, whatever it is. But you don't actually control the results. You only control the time, energy, and effort that you put in. And so this was a big mental shift in my goal setting a long time ago. I used to set goals based on what I wanted to achieve, not based on what I wanted to do to achieve it. And the reality is you can't force yourself. You can't just wake up one day and magically say, I'm fluent in a language. So as you're setting your daily goals, your weekly goals, I encourage you to reframe it to something that you do have control over. So for me personally, I recently did a bulk. This is my first bulk that I've done without a trainer, so like fully self-directed. And I set this goal of gaining 15 pounds by the end of the year. But I don't have direct control over how much I weigh. So what I do have direct control over is the amount that I work out and the amount that I eat. So I set a goal of 50 lifting workouts by the end of the year, 15 weeks, and averaging 3,500 calories daily. Those are two things that I can control. And the results were I got to 48 workouts out of 50, which is not bad. And I got plus 12 pounds in those 15 weeks, which also not bad. So I didn't control the results of that process, but I controlled the inputs, not the outputs. And so as we are looking to set goals for ourselves, make sure that you're focusing on things that you do have control over. The other thing that I highly recommend is to drop your goals a bit. So I used to set super ambitious goals. You hear this term in business called the BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goals. But the idea behind that is, oh, if you set your goal super high, then when you try and aim for it, at least you'll get close and you'll accomplish more than if you set a lower goal. But that doesn't take into account the psychology that comes along with not achieving your goals. It really wears down your confidence when you don't achieve what you set your mind to. And so part of what we need to do is rebuild our own confidence that we're actually capable of achieving the things that we set our mind to. We need to create a body of evidence that proves that we are capable of what we want to do. So as you're setting goals for yourself, if you have not really, if you don't have that body of evidence for yourself, if you don't have a track record of being able to accomplish things, I recommend starting with something that you're 90% sure that you can achieve. It's more important to start building up that confidence, build up the momentum, and build up that body of evidence than it is to achieve the most that you possibly can in a certain period of time. So, action. With language learning, if that's what you chose to invest these first 100 days of the year in, you control the hours. You don't control the results. You can't say, I'm going to be fluent tomorrow. So the question is, how many hours are you planning to invest in 100 days? And if you don't have a track record of doing something like this, then I recommend setting something very reasonable. So that could be 50 hours, which is half an hour a day, 100 hours, 1 hour per day. Those are reasonable numbers that most people can engage with over that 100 days. Most people can achieve 50 hours of language learning in 100 days. So what are you going to set as your goal? And you can drop this in the chat. What is an achievable goal that you want to set for yourself? And if it's language learning, it can be hours focused. If it's workouts, it can be a number of workouts. If it is a I believe there was physical therapy in there. So like number of physical therapy sessions or maybe daily physical therapy sessions. Those are all things that you can control. "30 hours of reading manga in Japanese." Sounds great. 1 hour per day. Managed it every day in December. So confident. Great. 100 asima lessons. Great. 3 exercise sessions per week. Also good. 100 hours of pure listening to check. Awesome. Now we're just going to look at the first 100 days rather than the whole year. I do not know Beeminder. I've not heard of that. $100. I'm doing all right. 100 hours of Dhamma. Okay. Coding for 80 hours. Great. So 2 hours per day. So it'll be 200 total in the first 100 days. 80 hours. Great. These are all perfect. So you all got the gist of this. You have control over this number. You don't have control over the results, but you do have control over time. Cool. All right. On to lesson 8. Reality is you're going to miss a day at some point. So consistency is a key part of any improvement, especially language learning. But at some point, something is going to happen. Either you're going to get sick or somebody else is going to get sick that you're going to need to take care of. Something big at work is going to happen. Maybe, God forbid, you get hit by a car. You will miss a day in this process, and it's inevitable. A lot of folks really like the streak as a tool to help build up that consistency. I personally think that streaks are a little bit dangerous because if you build up a streak of 100 days, then if you miss one day, you lose the entire streak. And so that's good because it's an incentive not to lose the streak, but it's bad because if you do lose it, which is somewhat inevitable, you're suffering a huge amount. What I prefer as a tool is hit rate. So that's the number of days out of number of days. So Ben has a 900-day Anki streak. He wants everybody to know. So I prefer hit rate because I often miss days. And it's okay to miss an occasional day. The problem is if you're missing too many days in a row, you lose your momentum and you start to build a new habit. As James Clear says, you build a new habit of not doing the activity. So this is something that you do have control of, similar to the hours number. You do have control of the number of days out of 100 that you're actually going to work towards your goal. And so in the next action, we want to set our hit rate for the next 100 days. So let's aim for something achievable. For context, 5 days a week is 70%, 6 days a week is 85%, and obviously 7 days a week is 100%. So I would recommend if you're not 100% sure, set 80%, maybe 70%. And then as you go through these 100 days, you're going to track the number of days you actually did language learning. And another thing that I like about this is that you can front load a lot of the percentage, a lot of the hits, which gives you more flexibility later on if you do need to take a break or if something important happens. So for instance, when I was doing my bulking routine, I needed to hit 3.5 a week. And for the first month of the process, I was going 5 or even 6 times a week. And that allowed me to have some buffer room when I wanted to go on vacation or when the holidays rolled around. So really thinking about it in the broader context of your goal rather than, oh, I missed today, it's the end of the world. You definitely don't want to be catastrophizing any time that you miss a day. All right. So this is a way to increase your hit rate. There will be days when you lose motivation. It's inevitable. You won't feel like doing whatever your goal is. And there's basically 2 options. You either do nothing for that day and it becomes a 0 day, or you do a little bit in order to just check the box and say that you did something for that day. And people think that, oh, doing a little something just isn't worth it. It's only worth it if I do something big. But the reality is a little something is still worth it. It helps you build that or maintain that momentum. It helps you check that box. It helps you get that hit rate. So we don't want to pretend that like we're never going to lose motivation, that we're always going to have the right a high level of motivation, a high level of willpower. But we want to create a plan for the days when we have a really, really low motivation, really, really low hit rate. So you have your normal plan, which is all of the cool stuff that you're going to do on a daily basis. But I also think it's important to create a sort of worst case plan. So that's the next action here. Plan your bad days. So everyone take a moment, think about a day, maybe recently, maybe imaginary, where you really don't feel like language learning or whatever your goal is. So maybe you are sick. Maybe you have had a really tough day at work, or you have been fighting with someone important in your life. You really just don't feel like doing the thing. And take a moment to think about what you would feel in that moment, write it down. And then the question becomes, what is something tiny that you can do to still make a little bit of progress towards your goal, even though you don't feel good? So think about something very, very small, like one Anki card review, one YouTube video, one page of a book, basically the bare minimum that you can actually put towards it to say, hey, you know what? I actually did something today, even though I felt terrible. What a lot of the gym bros on YouTube, a lot of the fitness gurus out there will say is like the days when you don't want to go to the gym are the most important days to go because the act of going continues the momentum. It becomes part of your personality that you do the thing even when you are sick and tired. Even if what you're doing is much, much less than you would do if you had lots of energy, you still want to do something. So we've got one super easy YouTube video or podcast episode. Sounds great. Jordan says, check the Anki box even if you do 2 cards. Awesome. $10-minute vocab review. Sounds great. YouTube Shorts, perfect for low days. Absolutely. I get sucked into YouTube Shorts in Spanish all the time. It's so addictive. That's why I still have YouTube as like the one social media that I use. Little goals like 1 page and then get some inertia. Absolutely. We're going to talk about that, Manuel. I have a whole slide about it. 1 page of Japanese. Atala is not sure. Having bad days, a timer, however much you can do in 15 minutes. Sounds great. 30 minutes passive listening. Sounds great. 5 minutes of YouTube. Awesome. Awesome. So y'all are getting the hang of this. We really want to just have, what is the fallback? What is your bare minimum on these terrible days? Cool. And we're already up to lesson 10, and that is gains come from rest. This is actually a recent one for me. This is not something I really, really prioritized earlier in my life. This is something that became very apparent when I was doing the bulking program. I came across many studies basically saying that if you don't get good sleep, you will not grow. Even 1 hour sleep deficit can completely ruin your gains. And so this is a repeated idea in the fitness community where gains are triggered in the gym when you're working out and you're doing the hard thing, but they don't actually happen until you recover when you're sleeping. The recovery is what allows your body and your mind to consolidate everything that you've done, to rebuild and refresh. There is a often heard anecdote in language learning and really with any activity and with any learning activity where you'll be struggling with something one day, you'll be working really, really hard at it, you'll be banging your head against it, it won't make sense. You go to sleep, you wake up the next day, you look at it, and suddenly it all makes sense. Your brain needs that time to consolidate information, and that consolidation is key to advancing to the next level. And so if you don't have a good sleep routine, if you're not getting rest on a regular basis, it's really, really important to figure that out because sleep is not time taken away from the process. It is actually time dedicated to the process. So highly recommend getting your sleep routines dealt with as quickly as possible. Occasionally, you might want to use a longer rest, either a day off or a week off. These are also really useful. Athletes do this all the time. when they are in the off season or when they have bye weeks, they take time away from the game in order to give their body a chance to fully recover and prepare for the next round of training. And we hear this often from our community members as well. They'll take a break from the language for a month or so, and then they'll come back and they'll actually be better at the language because whatever they had in their head has had time to solidify. They've had time to step away from it. And when they come back, they have a fresh perspective on it. They have a more solid grasp of things that they might have been struggling with. Cool. All right. So, summary of those 10 things, 10 lessons that I've learned over the past 10 years. Accept who you are today, know thyself and measure. Improvement is continuous. Excellence takes focus. Excellence takes time. Set goals that you have control over. Set achievable goals. You will miss a day. Check the box. And gains come from rest. So before I move on, just want to stop and give y'all a chance to ask any questions about anything that you might have had questions about in those past 10. I'm curious which one of those things has sort of resonated with you the most over the past 10 slides. And drop that in the chat. I'm very curious. Advice on figuring out how much sleep you need. Yeah, this is interesting. Generally, I aim for more. 8 hours is, pretty standard. Some people can operate on 6. Personally, if I don't structure my sleep at all, I sort of fall into like 3 days a week, 6 hours, 4 days a week, 8 hours. But right now and especially while I was doing the workouts, 8 hours was the bare minimum that I needed. And I also schedule a nap for myself every afternoon because I'm basically useless from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. anyway. So might as well recuperate during that time. And I find it just gives me more energy for the rest of the day. Mark says, you get up at 5 a.m. When do you go to bed every night? Usually around 9:30, 10-ish, so pretty early side. I have an alarm on my phone that just tells me to brush my teeth at 8:30 so that whenever I do get tired, I can just pass out. Because what I used to do a lot, especially in college, was I would just pass out wherever. And so preparing in advance, just like getting ready for bed so that when you have that moment of tiredness, you can just give into it is really powerful. I tend to find that if I stay up later, or like I get to that moment of tiredness and then I go brush my teeth, it like wakes me back up. So I think preparing for that ahead of time was a really important change in my life. 6, 4. Oh, there we go. Point number 6, set goals you have control over. Yep. 4 and 8, excellence takes focus, and you will miss a day. Yeah. Serene, 1 and 2, accept who you are today, know thyself and measure. Yeah. Can't decide. Ben is recommending Why We Sleep. He's been trying to get me to read this book for a while, and I probably should, given that I'm recommending sleep. So, when do I turn off my devices? I actually am not militant about that. I know some people who are, and there was a period of time when I used to leave my phone outside my room. Like I would, at 8:30, my phone would go off. I would brush my teeth, get ready for bed, and I'd leave my phone in the bathroom. But nowadays, it's not a huge deal. It does, like I don't sit on my phone, and it doesn't keep me up at night. I do leave my Kindle on my bed just so I have some reading material in the event that I'm not super tired or can't fall asleep. But that's really the only device that I end up using before bed. I think the pronunciation is Andre, but not sure. Biggest thing about sleep for me was to stop feeling ashamed about my sleep needs. Yes, absolutely. It's okay to sleep. It is required to sleep. Please don't feel ashamed of your needs to sleep. All right. And Micah says 4 and 7. So excellence takes focus and set achievable goals. Cool. So glad y'all got some value out of those 10. Now we're going to move on to sort of the second half of the presentation. And that's about motivation and willpower, or discipline, as many people call it. So when talking about personal improvement, motivation and willpower are sort of the two things that get talked about the most. And so I think it's really important that we just take a moment to explain what those are, because I think a lot of the times people don't really consider what that means. So on the motivation side, that's that internal feeling that you have that, oh, I actually want to do something. There's something driving me towards accomplishing something or doing a task, taking an action. The willpower is your ability to do an action even if you don't feel like it, even if you're not motivated. So doing things that you don't want to, or doing hard things that you don't have that motivation for. And these are fuels, essentially. These are the two fuels that you can put towards any goal that you have in your life. And these are the two fuels that you want to monitor as you're going through the process. So we'll talk about motivation first. To me, motivation is actually much less important than willpower. People talk about, oh, I just need more motivation, or they'll watch motivational videos. They focus on motivation as though it's the fuel that they use to drive themselves. And I used to do the same. And that's why I would usually give up on something after just a couple weeks, because my motivation would run out. Motivation is fickle. That means that it comes and goes. And you don't really choose what motivates you. Sometimes you can pump yourself up, but usually when you're interested in something, that's when the motivation starts. If you're trying to do something that you're not immediately interested in, then you won't have motivation for it. So it's not really a good fuel to rely on. That's all talking about internal motivation. There is this concept of external motivation. That's if you have some sort of accountability externally that can push you to do something. So if you have a deadline for work, or a deadline for school, or a teacher or a boss that's going to yell at you, or a parent, that can push your motivation forward, even if you don't have any internal motivation. But the challenge with personal projects is that we usually don't have any sort of external motivation going on. There's no one telling us or forcing us to learn a language. We're doing it on our own. And so I'm not going to talk too much about creating that external motivation. It is something you can try if you like, but it's not something that I would particularly rely on for personal projects. The much more reliable fuel is willpower. Willpower is something that we all have on a daily basis. It may not be as intense as motivation or obsession, when you get obsessed with a project, but it's much more stable and much more predictable. And so it is a much better fuel to use when powering your personal project. Your internal motivation will fade, it will come and go. External motivation may or may not exist, but willpower will always be there in some capacity. So William Faulkner has this joke. I only write when inspiration strikes, talking about willpower, or talking about motivation. Fortunately, it strikes at 9 every morning, which demonstrates that he actually has the willpower and the discipline to wake up at 9 every morning and start writing. So it's this joke that motivation is actually driven by progress and willpower. So, unfortunately, willpower is finite. It is not something that you have infinite of every single day. Basically, every time you take an action, it will drain your willpower. Every time you rest, it will replenish your willpower. A lot of folks talk about increasing your total amount of willpower, but that's really only possible when you practice doing hard things and then give yourself time to rest. Willpower is sort of like a gas tank. And you can't just magically improve the size of the gas tank. It gradually improves over time. You can't force yourself to have more willpower. If you could, that would be an infinite willpower machine. So really consider willpower as this finite resource that gets replenished every day when you're sleeping, or every night when you're sleeping. You wake up, you got a fresh tank, you drain throughout the day. And the more hard things you do, the more it'll drain. But over time, you can improve the size of the tank if you are consistently pushing yourself and trying harder and harder things. So when we talk about improving willpower, I'm not really talking about increasing the size of the tank. I'm really talking about what do you do on a day-to-day basis that you have control over. Because you don't really have control over the tank. That's just a long-term result. So there's two different approaches. You can either protect the willpower that you do have by using it on things that actually matter rather than things that don't. And then there's a efficient use of willpower. So you can reduce the cost that it takes to do an action. So you can reduce the amount of willpower it takes to do an action. Or you can just make sure that you're dedicating time and energy towards the things that have the highest ROI in your life. And all of the experiments that I've run on myself have really fallen into one of these two camps. Either it's trying to remove things from my life that are draining me, or it is trying to make the cost of things cheaper for myself, or it's trying to make sure that I'm just focusing on the most important things. Oh, ROI is in return on investment for those that don't know. So basically, you can think of your daily willpower and what you're doing, your daily actions, as an investment of time and energy. And what are you getting back for that time and energy? So we're going to go through 8 different ways that you can sort of optimize your willpower. There's obviously more. Someone recommended listening to the Andrew Huberman podcast about exactly this. Would recommend that. So over the past couple of years, I've talked to a lot of language learners, and one of the most common issues that I see is that they try to study when they're tired. I ask them like, okay, when do you do your intensive immersion or your interactive immersion? When do you do your Anki studies? And like, oh, I do it when I'm home after work and I'm tired, or right before bed, or after I put the kids to bed. And the first thing that I have them do is rearrange that, because if you are trying to do a hard thing, you're not going to be able to do it effectively if there's no gas left in the tank. People are surprised when they are using very little willpower or trying to, like, at the end of the tank, they're trying to do hard things, and they're surprised when it doesn't actually yield results. So you really want to identify when you have the most willpower in the day. Some people, that's right first thing in the morning. Some people need their coffee first. Some people are really effective at night. So you want to identify when you are the most effective during the day. And then you want to make sure you're doing the hardest things during that time. And the converse of that is when you have less willpower, when you have less energy, do the easy things. So that's the first action we got in the willpower section, willpower alignment. The first thing that I ask everybody is, when are you the most focused in the day, and when are you the least focused in the day? So are you a morning person? And throw it in the chat. Are you a morning person, or are you a evening person? Some people are even in the afternoon, they get lots of energy. When are you the most energetic and focused? Mornings, mid-mornings, morning. Right now. Never. That's a bummer. Nighttime. Morning after coffee. Mid-morning. 6 a.m., very early morning. Afternoon. Yep. Yeah, so this is something that's different for everybody. You really got to identify when in your day you are the most energetic. And so the question that goes next is, what is the hardest learning activity that you do on a regular basis that you want to do during that time? So for me personally, it's Anki. I hate Anki. I've never liked it. It's always the hardest thing for me to do. And so I have to do it first thing in the morning when I have the most energy. Yeah, reading is the hardest. Reading is hardest. Anki is my nemesis. Nights are harder to work out. Anki, making cards. There you go. That's slightly different. Anki and intensive immersion. Listening. This person enjoys Anki. Great. At the moment, active immersion. Tough. Yep. Ben does all of his stuff in the morning. Intensive. It's the hard thing. So you can see that different people experience this differently. Different activities are harder for some people than others. And so that's why we have to customize it for ourselves. So when we think about our schedule in the day, figure out when are you the most energetic, and what is the hard thing you're going to do then? And when are you tired, and what's the easy thing that you're going to do then? Yes, for people who are most productive at work, this can be a challenge. You might be able to steal some time away during the workday, but if you can't, then you have to sort of find a second option. So maybe that's in the morning, maybe that's after work. All right. Tip number 2, removing energy drains. So I'm not sure if you've ever seen pictures of Steve Jobs or Mark Zuckerberg, but they have the exact same wardrobe every single day. They wear the same clothes every single day. If you look at Mark Zuckerberg, a picture of his closet, it's just 10 of the same t-shirt and 10 of the same pair of jeans. Um, and the reason that they do this, and the reason a lot of CEOs do this, is it reduces decision fatigue. Basically, their perspective is I should not be wasting my willpower and my energy on things that don't matter because there are much higher return on investments that I can invest my willpower into. So you don't have to do this. I don't do this. This does not really, my choosing clothes does not really bother me. But for me personally, the thing that does drain my willpower, the sort of like standard chore thing that is part of life, is food. If I don't have easily accessible food readily available that I can heat up in the microwave in 5 minutes, it is extremely draining for me. It drastically impacts my productivity and all other aspects of my life. So what I do is once a week, I do a bulk cook. I cook probably 10 meals worth of food on Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday, depending on my schedule. And that way I always have food that is easily accessible, immediately microwavable. I don't have to think about where I'm going to get my nutrition for the day. Added benefit, bulk cooking, very cheap compared to going out to restaurants. So, on that note, what drains your energy and how can you remove or reduce it? What's something that is like a normal daily life chore that you want to fix, that you want to make better? Dennis, what's wrong with reheated food? It's just, I mean, it's not just as good, but it's pretty good. Work is draining to me. Yes, that is unfortunate. You can modify some things at work to be less draining. That is a possibility. Um, so like one thing is, let's say if you've got a bad Ethernet connection or a bad internet connection, right? And it's causing you annoyances, it's getting in the way of your video. You can invest a little bit of money and time into figuring out how to have consistent internet. Maybe it's moving the router closer to you, maybe it's plugging in directly. Because that tiny thing, that tiny bit of friction is just zapping you every time it happens. Another one that people really, really hate is laundry. Um, my dad, for whatever reason, just absolutely hated doing laundry. It was his least favorite thing. And he, at some point in his life, said, I'm just going to pay someone to do my laundry, just wash and fold, get it like picked up and dropped off, and like I don't have to deal with this. Um, and someone made a comment about having money being great for willpower. It absolutely is. That doesn't mean that you need to spend money on a lot of these things. Sometimes it just requires a little bit of time and energy. But yes, money definitely makes things easier, but it's important to invest your money in things that actually do make your life better instead of just frivolous purchases that don't actually change anything. Jonathan says having a coffee machine and then having workout stuff ready to go. Yeah, so for people who struggle to get to the gym, it's really important to have all of your gym stuff like easy to go or ready to go rather, and easy to just pick up and run. If you have to collect all of your, gym workout stuff, put it all in a bag, put on your shoes, and then go, it just adds a lot of friction. Um, let's see. How do you deal with soul draining jobs? Oof, yeah, I genuinely don't know. Find the humor in it, I guess. Um, Medication routine is draining. Yeah, absolutely. So if you are on repeated medications, daily medications, it's really important to get that figured out. Basically, every person I know that has that has the daily the box with like the 7 days a week. And at the beginning of the week, you fill it all up, and then you know which day you're on, and just take it at the right time. So really creating a system around taking your medications at the right intervals is really important. I use the washing machine as a laundry hamper. That's actually a nice hack. If you have your own laundry machine, just toss things directly in it. That's perfect. House cleaners, yeah. If you hate cleaning your house, bringing house cleaners, it's $100 a month, something like that. So expensive in Actually, I don't know how expensive it would be in other countries because cleaning is, relatively inexpensive. But all right, so let's move on to tip 3. So tip 3 is about designing an environment for success. Um, we are very, very influenced by our environments. So I don't know if you can see this picture, but it's a grocery store checkout aisle with a bunch of candy. Have you noticed that they always have candy at the checkout aisle in grocery stores, at Walgreens, CVS, convenience stores? There's always candy right next to the checkout. They do this because they are designing an environment that is supposed to create a craving in you and then provide an easy and immediate response to that craving, basically trying to encourage impulse purchases. They deliberately design the environment to foster those impulse purchases. And that's because we're all easily surrounded or easily influenced by our surroundings. We like to think that we're sort of completely independent, that we make our own decisions, but reality is we are influenced by everything around us, whether that's people, places, objects, anything that we interact with can drastically change our behavior. Stores know this, and I hope you know this too. But you can use this for your own benefit. You can create an environment around yourself that promotes the good and dissuades the bad. Good and bad in quotes here because nothing is objectively good and bad, but the things that you want to be doing, you can encourage through your environment, and the things you don't want to be doing, you can discourage through your environment. But you have to design your environment that way. So we're going to go through all the different ways that you can do this. So the first thing is you can hide the bad things. So imagine for a second that you're on a diet, that you're cutting down on sugar. If you were to put candy everywhere in your house, then every time you walk through your house, you need to exert willpower to not eat it because you have the craving, you're addicted to it. And so having it be obvious to you is a really bad decision and will drain you of willpower that you could be using on other things. Much better to either hide the candy or put it in or not buy it at all. And so if we look at our physical environment or our digital environment on our phones, there's probably lots of things that are distracting to us. If you look at the screen on the left, there's obviously tons of notifications that are trying to pull the person into the phone. The apps are all bright and colorful, just like candy wrappers. Apps are basically the candy of our digital world. And so you don't want to have these kind of distractions constantly pulling your attention, constantly giving you triggers and cues to start doing a bad behavior. You want to hide them as best as you can. So this is tip 4 action. Look around your physical environment, your room, your desk, wherever you are. Is there anything that is an immediate distraction to you? Do you have, for lack of a better term, a Game Boy sitting next to you? That would be very distracting. Do you put your phone right next to you as you're working? That can be very distracting. And then on the digital side, how can you actually hide your distractions a little bit? So one of the tools that I use is called a minimalist launcher. What it does is it changes the entire interface of the phone. What you're looking at actually is a screenshot of my phone and my notifications. So it's all text. There's no pretty icons or anything. If I want something, I have to either scroll to find it or I have to search for it. So which means I need to know the name, and it just adds some friction to using my phone. On the notification side, one of the neat features it does is it just hides all of the notifications behind this one 14 notifications cleared. It just says, okay, we're just going to take all of these and hide them together. I do still have my Gmail notifications available because I'm constantly monitoring for work. But a minimalist launcher is a great way to start the process of hiding a lot of the bad things that we don't want to be doing. Some other options, you can just uninstall the app entirely. You can move it off your home screen onto a second or third page. You can turn off notifications on the app so they don't constantly call back to you. There's tons of different ways for you to hide the distractions in your both physical environment and your digital environment. So is there anything, if we look back to where you're spending time, that digital well-being tool, is there a way that you can, let's say you're addicted to Instagram, that you can either uninstall Instagram, hide it, or turn off notifications? Those are all options. So anything that will hide them from view. iPhone focus mode is good. Yep. Uh, Eric turned off all notifications. Yep, absolutely. Ben comments that if you uninstall the app from your phone but leave it logged in on your Chrome, you can still use it. It's just a little bit more annoying, which is beneficial. Like Facebook actually doesn't let you use it on the web. You have to use you have to say, show me the desktop mode, and then it's very annoying to use. So that's a hack if you want to get rid of Facebook but still need access to it. Yeah, Jordan said most used app is YouTube, so maybe converting YouTube time to immersion. It's a really important thing to do. We have a tutorial of how to set up a YouTube immersion account and how to train it so that it gives you language learning. That's a really good tip, and it's something that I'm going to talk about in a little bit as well. All right, tip number 5, make the good things obvious. So this is the exact opposite of the previous one. If you're hiding the bad things, you want to make the good things obvious. So back to the health example, if you have a sweet tooth and you're trying to cut out candy, then putting fruit around the house is a good way to offset that. So take your sweet tooth craving and direct it in another direction. If you're doing language learning, then putting language learning books and resources around the house. In your digital environment, you can convert all of your apps over to the language. Sorry, not all of them. The tools or the apps that you're using in order to learn, or the apps that waste your time. So, for instance, for me, Netflix and YouTube are both in Spanish by default. I have a Spanish account, and that just means that I'm still taking advantage of the sort of candy-like nature of those apps, but I'm using it towards something that is actually beneficial to me. I also turn off English notifications for any English apps, and I'll turn on Spanish notifications. So I have El País, which is a news resource, and I allow notifications from that app. And, it sends me like 20, 30 notifications a day of like new things happening in the news, but it's all in Spanish. So when I see it, when I click on it, I'm getting benefit out of that. And so you really want to think about what are the cues and triggers that are going to remind you to do the good thing. So same idea. What is an activity that or behavior that you want to have happen in your life? And what is a cue or trigger that you can put in your environment to actually trigger that behavior? Yeah, and feel free to drop it in the chat. I'm curious what folks think of. So for me, having my Kindle next to my bed or even on my bed reminds me to read. And the book that I'm reading is in Spanish, so I will read that before bed, which is nice. There we go. Setting a bedtime on my phone to remind me to go to bed on time. Great. So you can use reminders, you can use schedules and calendars to create a positive behavior. Like I said, I had this behavior when I was younger where I would just fall asleep at around 9:30, 10 without brushing my teeth, and I would wake up like 2 hours later and then brush my teeth. Um, but now I set an alarm at 8:30, tells me to brush my teeth, get ready for bed, and then whenever I'm tired, I can fall asleep. So I use the alarm on my phone as the cue and trigger. Internet bookmarks on the desktop for your target language. That's a great one. So on your computer desktop or in your browser, you make all of your audiobooks or books in Spanish. Breakfast prep to grab something to eat rather than think about it in the morning. Yeah. So if you like prep ahead of time and then you like leave the breakfast out, if you're the kind of person that like forgets to eat, just having it there, like, oh, right, that. So lots of good options. All right. Tips 6, 7, and 8 all revolve around this concept of activation energy. So the idea is how hard is it to start something? And so on the internal side, it's how hard is it for us to make the choice to do something? where on the external side, it's how hard is it once you've made the choice to actually start the thing. So breaking it up into these two different realms gives us a framework to use when we're thinking about how to make things easier for ourselves. So back to the candy example, if you have a candy addiction, then you have a low internal activation energy for making the choice. You get a craving and then you suddenly like, I want candy, I'm going to go get candy. If it's very easy to access in your environment, it's like right there, then you have very low external activation energy. It's very easy to take the action. In terms of that specific example, you don't really have control over your own addiction, whether that addiction is candy or apps or social media or drugs. It's really hard to just force yourself to increase the activation energy on a decision-making level. You don't really have control over that. That's something that just changes over time. The only thing you can really do is increase the external activation energy, making it hard to start the thing once you do get the trigger and the decision. When something is hard enough, sometimes we'll get through that craving, we'll get through that choice and decide, you know what, actually, I don't want that thing. And that's when you can start to improve the addiction. That's when you can start to increase the internal activation energy of the decision-making process. So you really want to put some barriers in place. So for me, as I mentioned, I was addicted to social media, specifically Facebook and Reddit. I spent 4 to 6 hours a day on it, tons of time. And I tried a lot of different blockers. I tried to like use Facebook only in incognito mode. So I had to manually type in my username and password every time I used it. I tried to remove apps from my phones. I put timers on things that would like remind me like, hey, you're using too much time. But that just wasn't quite enough for me. I actually eventually had to use a tool called Cold Turkey, which is an app that blocks your other apps or other websites, and it's very hard to get around. There's like some emergency situations where you have to like contact them to unlock it, but it's very, very difficult to get around. And so what I did is I only allowed myself to use social media between noon and 1 p.m. each day. And what that meant is that when I had cravings for social media, I just couldn't use it unless it was during that time. And then when I was using it during that time, I would often just like lose track of time because you can just infinitely scroll, but it would cut me off at 1 p.m. every day. And so it would force me off that. And within just a month or two, I was like completely free of my addiction from both Facebook and Reddit, completely stopped using Facebook, completely stopped using Reddit. So if you're looking for a really, really intense solution to this, I do recommend Cold Turkey. Looks like Lock Me Out is a version on Android. Russell says Cold Turkey was like a magic key for productivity for me. So yeah, remember all of these apps are designed to be as addictive as possible and waste as much of your time as possible. So don't feel bad if you can't force yourself to get off of them. They really are designed to manipulate you. And so that goes into how do you make bad things hard to start, increase that external external activation energy. Another example in a physical space is, let's say you wanted to reduce your TV consumption. Something that you could integrate into your TV watching experience is after you use it, after you watch something on TV, unplug the TV and take the remote or take the batteries out of the remote. And that way you obviously still have access to your TV, but instead of it being oh, I'm going to mindlessly just turn it on with one click, you have to think about it, be like, oh, right, I have to do these 3 things before I can actually turn on the TV. And that's just a way to add a little bit more friction to decide, do I actually want to do this thing? And if you do, you can go through it with it. And if not, then you can decide not to do it. So is there anything in your physical environment or your digital environment where you're like, you know what, I just want to kill this thing. I don't want this thing to be available to me and I want it to be hard to do. I'm curious what people are addicted to on their phones. I talk to a lot of folks that struggle with Instagram, PlayStation, Instagram, NL YouTube. Reddit. Yep. TikTok. Yes, TikTok is the devil. It's the most addictive thing ever. And now YouTube integrating YouTube Shorts, also so addictive. It's really, it's really bad. They're very good at their jobs. Um, Twitter is another one that a lot of folks get addicted to. So yeah, so these are all things that if you are addicted to, I highly recommend investing some time into breaking those addictions. All right, so the opposite of that is good things. We want to make good things easy to do. And we're still going to use this internal versus external activation energy framework. Um, Externally, we already talked about making it obvious. And you can obviously make things easier to do by, moving it to your home screen on your app or making it apparent in your life, reducing any steps that it takes to start the behavior. What's much harder, though, is reducing the internal activation energy. And so I want to focus our attention there. You may be experiencing this as procrastination. So if you have a high external or internal activation energy for an activity, it usually leads to procrastination. And so we want to reduce it as much as possible to make it easier to start things and get through that procrastination. Like I said much earlier on, I used to be a chronic procrastinator. I would wait until the very last minute to do anything. And my senior thesis in college, I waited till like 2 days before and I stayed up for 36 hours straight working on it. And that was not a healthy experience. Um, so one of the biggest things that I had to personally work on was my inclination to procrastinate. And I still have that inclination. It hasn't gone away. I just now have tools to actually break through things. Um, and one of the biggest issues that I realized is that big, big amorphous tasks are just psychologically scary. When we say, "Oh, I have to do this huge project," we're inclined to not want to start it. If I say, "Oh, I have to study for 2 hours today," I'm inclined not to start it. And so getting through that initial barrier is the most important step because typically once you have some momentum, you can continue, you can keep going. But getting through that initial barrier is really the hard part. And so we talked about checking the box earlier as a way to, maintain our momentum and something to do when we're really low energy. But we can use that exact same technique for breaking through procrastination. So if you set a very small goal, 2, 5, 10 minutes, oftentimes what ends up happening is you build a little momentum and then you can keep going. It's hard to start, but it's actually pretty easy to keep going through. It's not always true, but it does work a lot of the time. So with that in mind, is there anything big in your life that you're procrastinating on, a big task, or if are you the kind of person that thinks like, oh, I don't want to do 2 hours of language learning? And if so, what is a small amount of time that actually doesn't seem as scary to you? Is it 5 minutes? Is it 10 minutes? Is it 20 minutes? I'm curious. Throw it in the chat. Like what's something that you're procrastinating on and what's a small amount of time? 15 minutes, 20 minutes. A couple people said 1 hour. To me, 1 hour would be a lot. 1 minute, 10 minutes, 15 minutes for doing laundry. Absolutely. You don't even need 15 minutes to do laundry. Exercise is intimidating, but walking in place on the treadmill for 5 minutes would be totally fine. Absolutely. A lot of laundry to fold, so 10 minutes isn't so scary, just like set a timer. And so the next question is, what are you going to use to set that timer? So most people use their phones. If you find yourself getting distracted by your phones, you can, I would recommend just buying another alarm clock or a timer, like a kitchen timer, something that is non-digital that isn't going to distract you. For me, I use an app on my computer called Vitamin R, and it ticks every 2 minutes. And then I also use an app on my phone. It's a high intensity interval timer, usually for workouts. And I do use it for workouts, but I also find it very useful for other things as well. And you can configure how often it ticks at you or beeps at you. And it just gives you some period of time that you can start working towards whatever project you're working on. A couple people are saying Pomodoro and Forest. I haven't heard of Forest. Cool. Yeah. So we want to make the action as small as possible so it's not a big deal to start it. By the way, if you are typing in the chat, make sure that you're sending it to all of us and not just to us, the hosts. I think by default it goes just to the hosts. And I see Ben repeating that one a whole bunch.
Yeah, right above the chat area, there's like a two and then little dots. Just make sure it's on everyone.
Yeah. All right. So tip number 8, as I mentioned, big amorphous projects are kind of hard to start. So a lot of the times when we set a goal for ourselves, we say, okay, I'm gonna do this task. But then when we actually sit down to do the task, we actually spend the first 15 minutes just planning what the task is and how we're going to do it. So we don't know what it is. It's just kind of like a vague idea before we sit down and do it. And then we waste so much time planning it, we don't actually do the task. So one of the things that we can do is we can actually front load the planning process and the decision-making process to a different time so that when we decide to sit down and do the activity, it is already laid out for us. We can just jump right in. So we really want to understand, like, what are we going to do? When are we going to do it? Where are we going to do it? On your desk or at a coffee shop, and then how. A lot of folks don't really break down the steps to start something. So one of the examples that I really like is going to the gym. You can set the what as I'm going to the gym, and most people stop there. But the reality is you need to get your gym clothes together. You got to put on your shoes. You might need to grab a bottle of water. You might need to eat something beforehand. And then you actually have to like go to the gym. So maybe you're walking there, maybe you're taking bus, maybe you're driving, whatever it is. And so breaking down the tiny steps will help you visualize what you actually need to do to start the thing. And then it becomes just, oh, it's just a checklist. I have to do this, this, and this. So let's think about something that you're trying to accomplish this week, whether it's language learning related or something else. And let's make a plan. What are you trying to accomplish? When are you going to do it? Where are you going to do it? And what are the small steps that it takes to actually start the thing? And the idea is if you answer those questions now, when the time comes for it, you can just jump right in. Like people are talking about the Forest app. Interesting. Plant a tree with every session you study. You can't use your cell phone or the tree would wither. You can see your forest for every month. Huh. That's super cool. I like that. Visual representations of your efforts is pretty cool. Let's see, we got somebody saying they want to go to the pool this week. So it's a great example. There's a lot of steps to go into the pool. You got to make sure you got your gym equipment or your swimsuit, your goggles, whatever else you use, that it's all combined together, that you have a process to go, knowing when you're going to do it. What is the impact of that going to be? Is it going to be before work, after work, during work, on the weekends? Breaking it down is really helpful for making sure you can actually do it when the time comes. So Ben is saying home workouts is something that he does his plan for. He knows they're always at 1 p.m. They're before lunch, and he uses an app that actually like guides him through it. So just boot up the app and go. For me, with my workouts, it was 11 a.m. I had it blocked off on my work calendar, and sometimes I would have a meeting that would run over through that. But as soon as that meeting was over, it was put on the shoes, grab my water bottle, go to the gym. Study math on my desk in the morning for 4 hours using 50-minute Pomodoro sessions. Sure. For something like that, you could be a little bit more descriptive. So you could say, what time in the morning are you going to study? Is it 8 a.m., 9 a.m.? Do you need to eat before you start? Do you need to get water? Do you need to get coffee? Are you going to do it at you said at your desk? Do you need to like clear off your desk? Do you need to have your math materials on your desk at the time? In which case you might be able to actually prepare your math studying the night before. So we really want to get as detailed as possible. Got Micah spending 30 minutes of active study listening. Choose a show with lots of content. Watch in the morning right before doing Anki. So I would recommend choosing the show now, like long before, don't choose it the morning of, choose it ahead of time. Watch in the morning after doing Anki. So then I would back up your routine and say, what happens before Anki? Because what you're describing is called habit chaining. So you finish Anki, you immediately go into the next thing. But before Anki starts, what is the habit chain that gets you there? Ben has been doing jujitsu, knows where all of his stuff is. He gets ready to go at 6:20, leaves at 6:30. He does it every Monday and Wednesday. So like pretty detailed plan. All right. We're over time already, so I want to speed through the rest of this, but recap. These are the 8 pieces of the tips for improving willpower. So aligning willpower to the hard thing, removing decision fatigue, designing an environment for success, hiding the bad things, making the good things obvious, make the bad things hard to start, make the good things easy to start by making them small, and front-loading decisions. I'm curious, if you had to choose one of those, what was most meaningful to you in that list? Number 8, front-loading decisions. Yeah, very important. I remember the first time I was trying to set up a good gym habit, having my shoes like right next to my bed was really helpful. I would just like roll out of bed and immediately put on my shoes. And then like once I had my shoes on, it was easy to walk out the door. 8 and 5, make the good things obvious. Yep. Decision fatigue. Yep. 1 and 3, aligning willpower and designing an environment for success. 6, making bad things hard to start. Cool. All right. Glad you all are getting some value out of it. All right. So it's not enough just to watch this presentation or to do this once. This is really an ongoing process. You have to rinse and repeat over and over and over again. Each of these techniques takes a lot of practice and repetitions. You can optimize basically anything in your life. And you really want to be doing this on a daily and a weekly basis going forward. The more experience you have with running these experiments and making these tiny improvements, the better you get at making more tiny improvements that have more impact. So the cycle of improvement ends up being you make a plan for yourself, you execute on that plan, you measure your results, you learn from that experience, and then you repeat that process and you just do it over and over and over again. I generally recommend doing week-long plans. That's a good amount of time to actually execute. And then on a daily basis, journaling what you do and how it felt, and measuring what you do. I set aside time on the weekends to actually do this process. And we actually do this with our coaching as well. So with that, that's the end of the presentation, but I want to call out a couple things. One, if you're brand new to language learning or you're having trouble getting started, I highly recommend taking our Teach Yourself a Language course. It's 30-day step-by-step plan. We give new tools and techniques daily. There's a lot of the habit design and environment design aspects in the course. And then we also provide coaching support to all of our learners. We've had over 1,000 learners go through it so far. And if you sign up before January 13th, 1 week from now, you get a 20% discount if you just type in webinar. And then if you want even more support and you want something more personalized to your needs, our coach Clayton is happy to take that on. We actually design our coaching around everything that I talked about in this, specifically around this improvement loop. We do weekly improvement loops, so the planning, execution, measurement, and learning. And we study your behavior. We run these experiments to identify what actually works for you and what doesn't. We can do individual sessions, and we do up to 12 weeks. But with 12 weeks, you can usually build up a really, really solid study routine. All right, that was a lot. So I'm going to answer any questions that you all have. How do I get a Refold t-shirt? There's refold.store. We're going to make it more apparent. But yeah, like refold.store. Oops, that's wrong. Yeah, Refold.store. All right. What other questions have y'all got?
There are a couple in the Q&A section that
Okay.
I can read to you if you'd like.
Yeah, let's do it.
So Cole asks, if 45% of people fail their goal within the first month per the presentation, is there a reason people shouldn't simply set monthly goals as a baseline, as opposed to trying to do a yearly goal? I think this would also help people stay grounded, reevaluate if a goal is actually meaningful or realistic for that individual, and allow them to be more focused on achieving a singular or a couple different aims. Yearly goals and quarterly goals have their place, but monthly goals might seem to be more useful.
Yeah, I think a monthly goal may be the right choice for a lot of people, and for the right projects as well. There's some projects that just don't take longer than a month. So you might as well use a monthly goal for that. I do think there's value in committing to a little bit longer than that, just because a month is pretty short for more intense goals. 3 months is sort of the minimum that I would dedicate to any significant project, because you don't see a huge amount of progress in just the first month with basically anything. And you don't really have time to build up your habits. What we find with our coaching clients is that it takes around 6 weeks before they are relatively solid in their habits, or even figure out what their habits are. And it's around 12 weeks when it becomes really solid. So if you only ever do a month, then you're not giving yourself an opportunity to really learn about yourself and learn how you want to tackle the project long term.
Yeah, if you go back to that loop, right, it gets really difficult to have a lot of those loops and I really iterate on them, because if you end up only getting like one or two in, then you can't actually improve them that much.
Yeah.
Or that's the learning
The
part.
Yeah, for our coaching clients, we see a pretty consistent routine. I'd say about 50% of people fall into this camp where they're very excited for the first 2 to 3 weeks, and then they drop off. So they put in lots of time, and then they drop down to very, very little time, and they miss all sorts of days. And then we have to rebuild them back up. And it does take, 3 to 5 weeks to build them back up to a really solid habit. And so if you're only doing 4 weeks, you don't have time to go through that process.
Great, thank you. Following up on that, Dennis asks what type of things you should measure for this loop. What is that measure section? If that word is doing a lot of heavy lifting.
Yeah, sure. It's very dependent on what the task is and what the goal is for language learning. Time and which activities you're investing time into is the primary thing. But then you're also looking at, did you actually do the thing that you thought you were going to do? So when you create your plan and your expectation, like, I am going to study at 8 a.m. and I'm going to like make my coffee and then start studying. Did you actually do that? Did your imaginary version of yourself, your plan for yourself actually happen? Or did you do something completely different? A lot of the times, like I said, we set goals for someone that we aren't, for this some idealized version of ourselves. And so what we really want to do is um, align the plan to who we are, but we learn who we are through creating plans and trying to execute on them. So a plan that you don't execute on properly is not a failure. It's just a data point that, hey, the plan might not have been right in the first place. Or maybe there's some other thing in my life that I was not considering that I need to include as part of the plan. So measurement isn't simply just a quantity. It's also a binary of, did I do the thing that I expect?
Yeah, I think that's also just the easiest one to implement. It's like easy, I
Yeah.
guess. Great, thank you. Okay, next one here is from PJ Fry.
Mhm.
In the case of a very large task like a thesis, um, the process isn't particularly hard. It's just a lot of work that takes a long time. What are
Yeah.
some good goals for something like that?
Yeah. So if I were working on something like a thesis, nowadays, not my 36-hour ridiculous work back in college,
Hmm.
um, I already have something built into my schedule now that works for me. So I wake up in the morning and I make coffee and then I immediately start working and I work for 4 hours. So I have 4 hours to dedicate to the most important thing every day. And in this case, that would be a thesis. And 4 hours is a solid amount of focus time. You may need to do more. But getting into that routine where you have a portion of your day set aside always for the thesis, just basically forever. Going back to that quote from Faulkner of, um, he writes when inspiration strikes, and inspiration strikes at 9 a.m. Same thing with the thesis. Like you should have a dedicated time in your schedule that is dedicated to the thesis, and nothing else should ever impact that.
Yeah, I once did a short seminar. It's actually free from Brandon Sanderson on creative writing, and he's one of the most prolific writers that's currently writing. And one of the things he does is that he has 2 4-hour sessions basically every day of writing where he just can just go and write and
Yeah.
get things out. And he's gotten really good at the process. And so he's not really doing anything that's difficult necessarily. Sort of like you said, it's not a super complicated thing, but it's every day he goes at it and publishes so many books.
Yeah.
And finding that thing that works for you, I think would be
Yeah,
helpful.
if you want to see a very clear difference between using willpower versus motivation, or using routine versus motivation, Brandon Sanderson versus George R. R. Martin is like the biggest contrast. Like George R. R. Martin was really driven by his love for the story and his motivation to write the book. And as soon as it became a TV series, he lost all motivation for it. And he hasn't published one since. Whereas Brandon Sanderson is publishing like a book a year, and these books are like 60 chapters and like 800 pages or
It's
something.
got to be more than that. It's got to be more than a book a year, even though,
Maybe more than a book a year.
yeah,
It's incredible.
cool. Thank you for that answer.
Mhm.
Here's one from Jordan. Do you guys have tips for making different routines for the same thing? I often get bored of routines, which sucks a lot of their efficiency. And so having different routines for something might be helpful.
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways to do this. In terms of different routines, there's a couple different things. One is sometimes you need a different routine. So, for instance, what we'll often do with clients is we'll create a weekday routine and then a weekend routine for them because what they can accomplish on a weekend is different than what they can accomplish on a weekday. So, having different routines is a very useful tool. But in terms of sort of changing it up, that's where something like having month-long dedicated approaches is helpful. But you can also just create two different routines and bounce between them. If you get bored of one, you can just switch to the other. As long as the overarching goal is the same, it shouldn't be a problem. I know that for me, I will often get bored of a piece of content. So if I'm like really focused on something, like I'm going through an interactive immersion with a piece of content, and then at some point I like, I'm done with this. I'll have to go find another piece of content, and I can either integrate that into my interactive immersion, just switch that, or I just switch it to be free flow. So yes, if you are the kind of person that constantly gets bored of routines, I also get very bored of routines. Ben is like a machine and can just do the same thing every day. I need to like
Hey.
change mine relatively. Hey, that was a compliment.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
No, I need to change my routines relatively frequently, otherwise I get bored of them. Um, but giving yourself this space weekly to figure out what your routine is going to be is where you have that opportunity to decide, am I happy with what I'm doing, or do I need to change things up to stay interested? I hope I
Good
answered that.
answer. Yeah, I think that was good.
Okay,
Yep, Jordan says, okay, thank you.
great.
All right, we have another question here from D.
Mhm.
I've been trying to learn a language, but I never seem to get a grasp on it. I'd say that because it isn't fun anymore. How do you get past that obstacle?
So I'm not
I
sure if
think
they mean that they don't get a grasp on the language or if they don't get a grasp on the language learning process.
I think I just never get far enough, is my guess.
Okay,
And there's a pretty common, or not a common, there's a pretty, I guess it's really commonly circulated, but a quote of languages aren't boring. Like what you do in the language might be boring. And
sure.
it's like it's very difficult for a literal like language to be itself boring. And so you have to find the ways that make it fun for you, right? Like any native speaker, if you ask them like if they get bored in their language, it's like yes, they do, but also they have a ton of fun in their language because that's not the factor. It has a
Yeah.
lot more to do about the things you do with it, how you engage with it, that sort of thing.
Yeah, at a certain point, the language kind of just fades into the background, and then it's about, am I doing the thing
Mhm.
that through the language, or like learning through the language, or enjoying yourself through the language, and the language just kind of fades away. My guess is that you probably haven't gotten quite that far before. You haven't reached a level where you can engage with the language at a fun level. The way that we do this, that we tackle this in our course is we actually call it the fun threshold, which is around the 20% mark through the process. And if you can get up to a place of knowing, 2,500, 3,000 words in a language, you can have fun in it. There's like no doubt. So what do you do before that? Well, you can create games for yourself. We promote one called the noticing game, where you are trying to do something because the language is a barrier to understanding and to enjoying, and so you need to find something that you can enjoy in the language itself rather than the content behind the language. So you can create a game. It's basically a scavenger hunt where you're looking for specific words, and you want to create those fun little games. And I'd say actually Duolingo is really, really good at this. They create this gamified experience that's really powerful for just maintaining engagement with something that otherwise would not be entertaining. I think Link also has a pretty interesting mechanism where they count the number of links that you make and you just mark the number of links. I don't think it's as well implemented, but some people do really like that because they see the number tick up. So you got to find those little games that keep you engaged in the process.
Cool. Thank you for the answer. And the last question right now, so if anybody has other questions, put them in, or else you're not going to get answered. The last current question here is from Miguel, and it is, will you make the presentation available? They want to come back to this very often.
Yes, we're going to record it. You'll have access to it. We'll send it out via email.
Yep, it's actually currently on YouTube being streamed, and it'll be a stream there. But yeah, you'll get an email tomorrow if you signed up with just the link and such.
Yeah. We probably will at some point turn this into like an actual course for people. Uh, as I was going through the creation process, everyone on my team was like, you should just turn this into a course. I was like, all right, fine. So, but yeah, the presentation itself, like the slideshow or the video.
I think they mean the slide, like the slideshow itself.
Sure, we can definitely like output the slideshow as a PDF to go with it. Cool. All right. And I think on that note, thank you,
Oh,
everybody.
go to the
Go
additional
ahead.
reading really quick. Go back a slide.
Oh,
I don't
oh
think you
no, I
showed this
will.
slide yet.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, my bad.
Yes. I just wanted to say thank you. Um, thank you everybody for coming in on a Saturday, for sharing your weekend with us. We really appreciate it. We hope that you found this useful. I really do. I'm really looking forward to seeing what all of you accomplish in the new year. Really excited for 2024. We're going to do a lot of cool stuff this year. If you're interested in any additional reading, these are the books that I generally recommend to folks. Atomic Habits by James Clear, The One Thing, Powerful Engagement, Power of Habit, Predictably Rational, Infinite Games, and Anti-Fragile. All great books can really help you to design your life in the way that you actually want to live it. On that note, thank you so much again. Hope you have a great rest of your weekend, and we will see you online.
We'll see you around. Thank you,
Yeah.
everybody.